program is coming for Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Bloomberg Businessweek billionaires Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson dominate the emerging industry of commercial space flight. They're competing to put satellites, tourists, for both in space in their bid to become cheaper alternatives to NASA, the European Space Agency, and other government-run space programs. But like pioneers in the smartphone and artificial intelligence industries before them, they now face competition from a deep-pocketed upstart that threatens to disrupt their launch pads, China. President Xi Jinping has loosened the government's monopoly on space launches, and that's fueling the formation of small domestic companies with ambitions to challenge Musk's SpaceX, Bezos' Blue Origin, and Branson's Virgin Galactic. The startups are receiving funding from China-based venture capitalists and private equity investors trying to tap into an $8 billion national space budget second only to the U.S., according to the Space Foundation in Colorado Springs. They can also rely on the expertise of rocket scientists from China's vigorous manned space program. We are really a startup growing on the shoulders of the state aerospace giant, says Zhang Chongwei, Chief Executive Officer of Beijing-based Lan Space Technology Corporation. There's no better time for a commercial rocket firm to grow in China than now. The number of satellites in space increased 50% from 2013 to 2017 to 1,738, according to the Satellite Industry Association. Chinese launchers could help manufacturers seeking an inexpensive way to get even more of them into orbit. One lucrative payload for the Chinese could be miniature satellites, which can weigh less than 200 pounds. Launching these satellites will generate $15 billion in revenue by 2027, up from less than $100 million last year, according to the Paris consulting firm Euroconsult. That's also a niche where big players such as Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX, whose Falcon Heavy rocket can't lift into orbit payloads of almost 64 metric tons, 141,000 pounds, have been less active. Several mainland companies have succeeded with suborbital launches and are vying to be the first in China to place satellites into orbit around the Earth. Founded in 2015, Launch Space had raised $500 million and $72 million from local investors by April 2018 and employs 170 rocketers and other engineers, almost all veterans of the National Space Program, Zhang says. The company plans to launch a rocket this month carrying a satellite for state-run broadcaster CCTV. Two other Chinese companies have orbital launches scheduled by 2020. Xi opened the space market to private sector investment in 2014 to help China's technology sector shift focus from commodity smartphones and televisions to sophisticated semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and reusable rockets. More than 60 Chinese companies have entered the commercial space industry in the past 3 years, the state-run Xinhua news agency reported in May. Musk's popularity in China is the second largest market for his Tesla Incorporated electric vehicles. He has also inspired many startups. SpaceX has had a huge impact, says Lan Tianyi, founder of Ultimate Blue Nebula, the Beijing-based space consultant. Nobody in China thought that a private company could develop a rocket. But now they see that a U.S. company can do this, and it's very famous in China. China wants to be one of the world's top 3 aerospace powers by 2030, Wu Yanhua, vice administrator of the China National Space Administration, said in December. Toward that goal, Xi envisions private sector launches of satellites for customers in China and in countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative, his program to build ties throughout Africa, Asia, and Europe by funding infrastructure projects. Government investment alone isn't enough, Wu says. And leaving commercial efforts to private companies also lets the government focus on prestigious quests such as landing Chinese rockets on the moon by the 2030s. The leadership hasn't picked a favorite, preferring to let the market select the national champion, as was the case with Tencent Holdings Limited in smartphone messaging and Alibaba Group Holding Limited in e-commerce. Launch Space opened a factory costing almost 500 million yuan about 90 miles west of Shanghai this year, with capacity to produce 15 rockets using liquid propellant annually. The facility eventually could make 200 engines a year, Zhang says. Another startup, Beijing Interstellar Glory Space Technology Company, in September sent 3 test satellites into space aboard a solid-fuel rocket. The company, founded in 2016 and also known as iSpace, has raised 600 million yuan from investors such as Xunwei Capital, whose chairman, late June, is co-founder of smartphone makers IME Corporation. The company is developing the less expensive rocket using liquefied oxygen methane that it hopes to launch in 2020, says Hu Jie, a vice president who spent 6 years developing rockets for state-owned China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. We have to lower costs as much as possible to compete on a global scale with peers like SpaceX, he says. There is massive demand for satellite launches from small and private firms. One space technology company in Beijing, which has raised about 800 million yuan since its founding in 2015, has launched 2 suborbital rockets this year and plans to reach orbit by year-end. Its factory in Chongqing will be capable of making 30 to 50 rockets annually by 2020. And the 200-employee company plans to open an engine manufacturing facility in 2019. Blaine Kerr, CEO, founder of Orbital Gateway Consulting in Hong Kong, says most Chinese rocketers have a long way to go because their rockets aren't reusable and can't handle heavier payloads. Instead, the startups will, for now, at least count on demand from companies developing smaller, lighter satellites for meteorological, telecommunications, and navigational use. That initial concentration on emerging demand for small, low-altitude devices doesn't concern Kerr, CEO. I don't think there's anything keeping them from competing with SpaceX from a tech perspective, he says. We've seen in China that they can catch up in industries where it seems hard to catch up.